Go.
Hatsorayim Tovim, good afternoon. Welcome to you, Shabbat Shalom. This is our Shabbat afternoon class, and we're studying Judaism 101, foundations of what we believe, and we're studying the Ramchal, Rabbi Chaim Mordechai Lusano's book, Derech Hashem, The Way of God. And we're in the midst of studying the purpose of creation. What is the purpose of creation? And so, not to reiterate or go over what we have already done, we've done that enough, so we're going to move on where we ended up last week. Therefore, he says, therefore, even though created things cannot emulate God's perfection in their own right, the fact that they can be attached to Him allows them to partake of it, since they can be considered part of God's perfection as a result of their association with Him. They can thus derive pleasure from the true good to the greatest degree possible for them. So, we were created as, we were created in order to derive pleasure. We were created to experience pleasure. So this is the desire of mankind. This is the thing that man craves, that man desires the most, is to experience pleasure. We want to be pleasured. And again, as we have discussed before, we're not going to go into depth and detail into it, but as we have discussed before, that this was the purpose of the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden was the most pleasurable experience for mankind. How did we derive pleasure in the Garden of Eden? We derived pleasure by the work of the garden, by taking care of the garden. Today, man would say, that's not, maybe it's not so pleasurable an experience. You know, doing yard work, mowing the grass, hoeing, trimming, these kinds of things. Maybe not so much the kinds of things that we want to do. But man was created for this purpose, and so these were the things that brought him pleasure. And what has happened is that when man disobeyed God, when man ate of the tree, the relationship, the conduit by which we receive pleasure, this conduit was broken. And so we no longer receive the pleasure that Adam and Chava would experience. We no longer experience that kind of pleasure. So, since we were created to receive pleasure, for pleasure, to experience pleasure, we crave pleasure. Now that the source of our pleasure has been cut off, man goes looking for pleasure in other places. We're looking for pleasure in other forms. And the thing about the pleasure that we find is, number one, usually, most of the time, it is not good for us, and number two, that it is not long-lasting. The pleasurableness that we experienced in our relationship with God was something that had life to it. It was extended, we could say, and we find this in the remarks of Yeshua when he says, not to lay up treasures for yourself on earth where moth and rust corrupt and thieves break in and steal, but rather lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not corrupt and thieves cannot break in and steal. For where your heart is, there your treasure will be also. But saying that those things which are treasure, those things which bring us pleasure, there is to be an eternality, an eternal aspect to them. The things of this life and of this earth, there is no eternality to these things. They are finite. They're limited. They're limited in their resources and they're limited in their reach. They're limited in the effects that they have. And so, you know, it's like dropping a pebble in a pond, and the pebble creates a wave. That wave will go for a distance, but eventually the force of that wave plays out, and the wave itself will die. And so it is with the pleasure that we receive from the physical life, from the physical realm, the physical world, that these things, they play out. You drop the pebble in the pond, you receive the pleasure of the physical things of this life, but very quickly the force of that pleasure, the strength of that pleasure is played out. And so we have to do it again, we have to do something else, we have to, in order to sustain the pleasure. You have to keep going back to it. Oftentimes the way our brain is wired, where we become used to something, and so what we did the first, second, third, fourth time is no longer sufficient to please us, to bring us pleasure. So you have to do it to a greater extent. A person who is an alcoholic does not derive much pleasure from a single drink or even 2 or 3 drinks. They have to have many drinks. A person who does drugs, oftentimes they become used to the drug, where the drug no longer has the effect on them that it used to have, and so the drug has to be used at a stronger potency, a greater strength has to be given to the drug so that it can be felt, experienced the same way. They get the same hit, the same high, these kinds of things. And so this is the pleasure of the physical things, the physical life, where we have turned because the spiritual conduit has been closed off, is broken off, and we're not receiving the flow. So we're not receiving the pleasure from the eternal one that we used to experience, as I say used to, as Adam and Chava would have experienced. We can no longer experience that. And so mankind has turned to the physical source of pleasure, of pleasurement. That is, we're experiencing pleasure in the nefesh b'chama. We're experiencing, most of mankind experiences his pleasure in the physical nature, in the animalistic instincts, so that we have these cravings, we try to fill these cravings. How do we fill these cravings? Well, basically the same way that an animal does. And an animal has his instincts, and so he roams around seeking to quench these instincts by feeding himself, by mating with other animals, these kinds of things. You have all of these instinctual things taking place. He's trying to fulfill for the nature, the natural thing, the nature by which he's been created. Mankind basically is doing the same thing, because by breaking the law of God, by turning our back on the Torah, by turning our back on the tree of life and chasing after the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, by eating of its fruit, we broke the conduit, we broke the means by which we receive pleasure, not just a short time pleasure, but the eternal pleasure, the pleasure of being attached to the eternal God. That's all been broken off, and so now what do we have to do but to go to the physical realm? And we strive to find pleasure in those things that are physical. And of course the physical is finite. And because the physical is finite, it can only be, we can only find pleasure in these things for a short while. And then what? You have to go back to it, and you have to go back to it, and you have to go back to it. So this is the issue. This is the problem. So he says, the Ramchal says, that created things cannot emulate God's perfection in their own right. The fact that they can be attached to Him allows them to partake of it. So, I cannot emulate, I cannot copy what God has done. I cannot copy who God is, what He does, how He thinks, any of these things because he's God and I am human. So this goes back to the fact that God is infinite and we are finite. And we cannot relate to that. He is limitless. He is boundless. He's without definition, all of these things. So how do I relate to him? And since the conduit has been cut off, it becomes even more difficult for us to relate to him. How do I relate to this infinite being? And how do I emulate him? To emulate, we've spoken to the term B'Tselem Elohim, that we are created in the image, B'Tselem, in the image, Elohim, of God. What does this mean? B'Tselem, in the image of God. You remember that God said, "Let us create man in our image and in our likeness." And so what does it mean, B'Tselem Elohim? What does it mean, in the image of God? Well, the word Salam, Tzadi Lamed Mem, Salam, is to be a shadow. What does it mean to be a shadow? Well, if you're standing under a light and you look down, you have a shadow. You're standing out in the sunshine, you have a shadow. Understand that the shadow does not act, does not move, does not do anything, does not go on its own motivation. A shadow is a duplicate of you, in effect. So that your shadow only moves when you move. It only moves where you move. It only does what you do. So you're walking down the street and you look down and there's your shadow. If you stand still, what? If you stand still, your shadow stands still. If you pick up your arm, the shadow will pick up its arm. If you jump up and down, your shadow will jump up and down. Whatever you do, your shadow does. If you move, your shadow moves. If you stand still, your shadow stands still. It cannot act out of its own. This is what is meant by B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. As we said, this word in the image is rooted in the Hebrew word for a shadow. So we are, in effect, shadowing God. You'll notice that your shadow is attached to you. When you look down, you remember the story of Peter Pan. And how does the story of Peter Pan start? How does it all start? That Peter Pan, that his shadow disattaches itself from Peter Pan. It goes off on its own. So Peter comes to the house of Wendy in order to find his shadow. He finds his shadow and he sits down on the floor and he sews the shadow back onto his feet. This is a fairy tale, of course. Your shadow cannot do that. Your shadow is attached to you. So when we talk about B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, that we are created in the image of God, what we're saying is that we have this attachment to God, that we are attached to Him. So that we move only when He moves, and where He is still, we are still. Where He moves, we move. Where He is still, we are still. Where He when He picks up His foot, we pick up our foot. When He picks up His hand, we pick up, we're His shadow. So that we're acting, as we could say, we're acting in concert with Him. That we are acting in connection with Him. We are His shadow. This is what is meant by B'Tselem Elohim. This is what is meant by in the image of God. That we are acting in concert with Him because we are connected to Him. This is the way that man was created in the beginning. Remember that it was in the beginning. It was during the act of creation that God said, let us create man in our image, that is, as our shadow, in our likeness. That as he would move, we would move. When he would be still, we would be still. That we would act in concert with him, that we are attached to him. So that his way would be our way, his words would be our words, his thoughts would be our thoughts, his will would be our will, all of these things. And it was through this that we derived pleasure. It was by means of this that we derived pleasure. That all we truly longed for was to have this attachment to God. This was what was pleasurable to mankind, to Adam and Chava, that they had this attachment. So that when they worked in the garden, they were working in attachment, in coordination with God. That they were working alongside of God. This was the attachment. That they were joining God in his work. And it was from this that they derived their pleasure. They derived their pleasure by joining God in his work. And nothing else would bring them pleasure like this. As we had stated earlier, it is something to think about that Adam and Chava did not have physical relations, did not have sexual relations until after they were out of the garden. Why is this? Why did they not have physical relations until after they were out of the garden? Because they derived true pleasure in their relationship with God, with one another. But they did not need, in effect, they did not need the physical relationship with one another, because their true pleasure was derived in their relationship with God, in their attachment to God. And so we find that it is only after the relationship with God is broken that they then turn to one another to derive pleasure, to find pleasure. And so in a way, all of their pleasure was found in being in this attachment, in being attached to God, in working side by side along with him in creation, in the effect of creation. And so this is the way in which we emulate God. We emulate God by seeing what he's doing and doing that. By hearing what he's saying and saying that. In this way, in a great way, in this way, we understand our relationship with Yeshua. As Mashiachim, as Messianics, we proclaim ourselves to be followers of HaMashiach, of the Messiah. That we are the followers of Yeshua. Well, what does it mean to be a follower of him? If he goes to places where we're not willing to go, then am I following him? If he's doing things that I do not do, am I following him? If he's saying things that I'm not saying, am I following him? But what does it mean to be a follower? In terms of the church world, of Christianity, we say the same thing. The term Christian is similar to the term Messianic. Christian comes from the Greek word Christos, The Christ, which means the anointed one. Mashiach means the anointed one. The Messiah. The Christ. So these terms are related, are very similar to each other, and their understanding is very similar to each other. So whether I call myself Mashiachi, a Messianic, or whether I call myself a Christian, either way, I am saying that I am a follower of the Anointed One. I am a follower of the Messiah. I am a follower of the Christ. I am a follower of Yeshua. I am a follower of Jesus. So this brings us back again to the question, what does it mean to be a follower of Him? This means, if I say that I am a Christian, what I am saying is that I am like Him. That I am like Christ. If I call myself Mashiachi, I'm saying that my lifestyle is that of the Messiah. And this is exactly what it means, and this is problematic for all of us. Because if I say that I am a follower of the Christ, if I say that my lifestyle is like that of Christ, that's what the word Christian means. If I say that my lifestyle is like that of Christ, what does that entail for me? What is determined then for me? What does that mean about my lifestyle? If I say that my lifestyle is messianic, that is to say that my lifestyle is that of the Messiah, then what does that mean for me? What does that say? So the understanding is this. You'll recall that Yeshua had 12 Talmidim. In English, that word is translated Talmid. A Talmid is translated as disciple. Literally, it is a student. The word literally means student. And so he had 12 students. If he has 12 students, that would make him what? If he has students, that would make him what?
Teacher.
A teacher. Which is why they called him Rabbi, Rabboni. This is why they called him Master. Because he was the teacher. They were the students. And so, to disciple someone needs to school them, to teach them. To teach them what? To teach them what we know and what we have learned. And so Kepha, Peter, speaks to these things. He says, we speak what we know and what we have learned, what we have heard, what we have seen. So, saying all of this to say, what does it mean? That I am a Talmid, that I am a disciple. The word disciple comes from the word discipline. That I am disciplined, that I am being disciplined. Now, today's context of discipline, if I say that I am being disciplined, most of us have the idea of punishment, that I'm being punished. A person at the school who does the punishing of the student is called the disciplinarian. He sets down the punishment. The record of your punishments, of your actions and your punishments, is called your disciplinarian record. And so, in effect, by today's understanding, by today's standard, the term to discipline is the idea of being punished, but that's not correct. There can be punishment involved, sure, because punishment is intended to do what? To teach us. But if we are making disciples, if we are going to disciple people, why do we say that we're going to disciple people? We're going to bring about discipline. What is discipline? Discipline, in effect, is structure. It is teaching. When a person goes to college, he chooses, usually in his second year, by his second year, at least, he's chosen what his discipline is going to be. That is what his major is. What is my major in college and what is my minor in college? My major, when I was in college, my major was broadcasting, television and radio. My minor was in Jewish studies. And so these were my disciplines. So the classes that I took were aimed and geared to these things. Everything was aimed at bringing me to this point for public speaking and for understanding of Jewish theology. So this was my discipline. That is, this is the structure of my education. The structure of my education, the discipline of my education were in public speaking and in Jewish studies, in Jewish theology. The same thing applies to the idea of the disciples and Yeshua. That they were being educated in the ways of Torah, that they were being educated in the truth of Torah, in how Torah works, in how it should be applied to our lives. And this is what Yeshua was doing. He was educating them. He was teaching them. Thus, he was Ravi. He was their rabbi. He was their master. And they were HaTalmidim. They were the disciples. Literally, they were the students. They were being educated in the ways of God, in the things of God. Now, the reason why I'm expressing this is because, and what does this have to do with whether I'm a Christian or whether I'm Messianic or these kinds of things? Well, it has everything to do with it. Because in saying that one was a Talmid to a certain rabbi, that one had attached himself to that rabbi. So that the 12 Talmidim of Yeshua, the 12 disciples of Yeshua, saying that these 12 had attached themselves to him. What does it mean to have attached themselves to him? Well, it means that they existed with him. That is, they lived with him. What do we mean they lived with him? Literally, they lived with him. They were with him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, day in, day out, morning, afternoon, night. They were with him. When he got up, they got up. When he ate breakfast, they ate breakfast. When he went out, they went out. When he came in, they came in. When he ate lunch, they ate lunch. When he was out healing, they were there. When he was out teaching, they were there. As you read through the Besorim, as you read through the Gospels, what do you find? That everywhere you find Yeshua, you find these Talmidim, these disciples. They're there with him. Day in, day out. Story after story after story, there they are. If you spend enough time with someone, you're going to take their traits upon yourself. Especially if it is someone whom you emulate. If it's someone whom you put up on a pedestal. Someone whom you admire. So we have in our modern world, we have movie stars. We have idols, so to speak. And a lot of them are true idols. What? They're worshipped. They're admired and venerated to such an extent that they're literally being worshipped. And so we have these people whom there certain ones emulate, saying what? Well, when the model wears, when the movie star wears their hair in a certain style, a certain certain female movie star wears her hair in a certain style, and all the girls start wearing their hair in that style. When they wear a certain dress, certain outfit, certain clothes, all the girls start wearing those clothes. When a male movie star starts wearing his hair in this style, then all the men start wearing their hair in this style. They start wearing the clothes. They start when a certain phrase is used by certain people, then a whole bunch of people start using that phrase, this kind of thing, so that they're emulating what? They're looking and they're sounding and they're acting like the people whom they admire, whom they emulate. So we say that we admire Yeshua, we emulate him, we say that we're, that he's our master, that he's our king, and all of these things. And yet, how closely do we emulate him in his style, in his ways, in who and what he is? This is the literal meaning of what it is to be a Christian or to be Mashiach, to be Messianic. Why? Because the Talmud emulated the way of his rabbi. As his rabbi was, so was he. And even to this day, in many Orthodox communities, as the rabbi is, so is the Talmud, so is the disciple, the student. Saying what? Well, you'll notice in Orthodox Judaism that certain sects of Orthodox Judaism or ultra-Orthodox Judaism dress in certain ways. So that when you see an Orthodox or an ultra-Orthodox person, man, woman, walking down the street, you understand that they are Orthodox. Simply by the way that they're dressed. You can tell that they are Orthodox in their belief. Why? And why do they dress this way? They have the fedora, they have the coat, and the tie, the white shirt like this, the white shirt, the black coat, the black tie, and all of these things. Why do I dress this way? Well, primarily because I'm Orthodox in my belief. And so, but you'll notice that all of the men, they wear the same fedora, they wear the same hat, and then you have the ones, the Chassidim, who have the big fur hats and all of these things, and all of the men, when you see a congregation together, all of the men will have that same big fur hat on. Chabad, they all have the same fedora on. The different, the Chassid, who are the Nachmanites, they follow Nachman, and they wear the same type of kippah. They all have this, and so, well, why do they all dress this way? In Christianity, you can relate by the Amish. They all dress the same. The Amish, they all have their beard, no mustache, but they all have their beard. The hat, it's all the same. They all wear the same colors. All the women are dressed the same. If I were to say to you, the pilgrim, you understand, because we all picture the pilgrims as all dressing the same, with that the stovepipe hat with the buckle on it, and the black coat and the white shirt and the knee pants and the white socks and the black shoes and the buckles and all of that. The women dressed in their white scarves and shawls and bonnets and their black dresses and the white aprons and everything. And when you think of the pilgrims, everybody dressed the same. They were the Puritans. And so they all dressed the same. So why do these people all dress the same? Why do they all dress alike? Well, the reason in Judaism, the reason why this Orthodox sect, they all dress this certain way, this specific way, is because this is the way their rabbi dresses. And they're emulating him. They're copying him. The reason why they all wear the same looking fedora is because they're emulating, because this is the type of fedora that their rabbi wears. The reason why they're in the Hasidim, they're all wearing the big fur hat, is because this is what their rabbi wore. And they're emulating him. Because to be with your rabbi in such a way, to be attached to one's rabbi in such a way, this is what it meant to be a talmid, to be a disciple, is that one was attached to the rabbi in such a way that how he dressed was how the disciple would dress, how the talmid would dress. How the rabbi dressed, the talmid would dress. How the rabbi spoke, this is the way the talmid spoke. What the things that the rabbi did, this is the way the talmid did. This is what it means to be attached, to emulate. This is what it means, Betzelem. in the image of. So when one is reading the Talmud, one will read that so-and-so spoke in the name of Rabbi so-and-so, saying, Rabbi so-and-so would say to us thus and thus. Saying what? He's not speaking his own words, he's speaking what was taught to him by his rabbi. He's emulating his rabbi. He's not speaking his own words. In effect, this is what it means to be a Christian. This is what it means to be a Mashiachi. Literally, the idea of being a Christian is not the understanding of being a Christian today, where you have this mental acknowledgement that Jesus is Christ, is the Son of God, and all of these kinds of things, but you're just living your life however, and you're doing whatever and going wherever and however and all of these kinds of things. It used to be, and in the beginning particularly, it was that this thing of being called a Christian had great meaning, had great emphasis. It wasn't the watered down idea that it is today. That being Mashiachi, that being a follower of the Messiah had great meaning, had great significance. Because literally what it meant was that I emulated the life of my rabbi. So that how he dressed, this is the way I dressed. How he spoke, this is the way I speak. How he lived, this is the way I live. What he did, this is how I do. Some of you have heard this before, but some have not, perhaps, and some online perhaps have not. We speak of the Talmud. Talmud is where we get the word Talmid. Remember I said that Talmid means student. Talmud means learning, teaching, a class, to study. There are those in Hebrew roots and even some among the Mashiachim, but particularly among Christianity who throw away the Talmud and say that these are just traditions of man and they do not apply to us. And by the way, those of you who say that understand that many of the Christian commentators of the Bible, such as Matthew Henry, such as Fawcett and Brown and these different ones, actually relied on the Talmud quite heavily to understand. Oftentimes they did not give credit to the Talmud. In fact, I have seen Christian commentaries where they literally quote the Talmud practically word for word and then don't even give credit to it. Why is this? Because the Talmud, we've been taught the Talmud is bad, 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 and it's just the tradition of man and all of these kinds of things. There is one commentator who often quotes, there are actually two commentators who often quote the Talmud and give the credit to it. And what is a commentary called Gil? He quotes the Talmud. He's a Christian commentator. Wrote a Christian commentary on the whole Bible, on all of the scripture. He often quotes the Talmud and he gives the credit, he gives the sources to it. The other is a Jewish believer from I think he was from the 1920s or such back there, whose name was Edersheim. And he was what back then was called a Christian Jew, or a Jewish Christian. And he also, in his explanation of the life of Jesus and Bible times and such as that, and he also often quotes the Talmud, sources the Talmud. One of the arguments about the Talmud is that it often has things in it that you don't find in Scripture. we're going to get into this in a few weeks when we come into this study of Shabbat on our Boker Shabbat and our morning Shabbat services, our morning Shabbat teachings. We're studying the Ten Commandments right now, and we're going to get into this thing of keeping Shabbat. Because there are what are called fences that have been put up. And Christianity teaches that these fences, they're not necessary, these are burdensome, these are things that have been put up, that these are just traditions of men and all of these kinds of things. The whole idea of not buying and not selling on the Shabbat, you do not find in the Torah. The Torah does not say you may not buy and you may not sell. Where does this come from? It was Ezra in his book, in the book of Ezra, we find that he instituted the law of no buying and no selling on Shabbat. Why did he do this? Because they had just returned from the Babylonian captivity. And they have just finished building the walls, and now they're finishing the temple. And they're getting ready for all of this. And the Samaritans are coming and setting up their booths outside the city wall so that the people of Jerusalem will go out and buy and sell. So that they'll go and buy the goods. There is no contradiction, there's no consternation for the Jewish people not to buy on Shabbat. Ezra goes out there and he tells the Shomronim, the Samaritans, that if they come the next Shabbat when they come, if they come, and they set up their booths and they attempt to sell merchandise to the Yehudim, to the Jews, he will kill them. You say, well, that's rather drastic. That's like, we have market days going on right now. It's like going out to market days and going out there, and saying, telling the people out there, hey, you come and you set up your booth here, we're going to beat you up. And so it would be we would think of this as being rather extreme. So why would he do that? Why would Ezra do that? This is not a rule that's found in the Torah. Why would he make this rule? He's putting a fence up. Why is he putting this fence up? Because they just got back from Babylon. They just spent 70 years in Babylon. They just got back from spending 70 years in exile. Why were they in exile? For not keeping Torah. What did they get? What did they do? How did they not keep Torah? One of the ways that they did not keep Torah was that they did not keep the Shabbat holy. And so God sent them into exile. So here they come back to the land, here they are back, and Ezra finds that they're just going back into the same routine that got them exiled to begin with. Ezra says, what? It's not going to happen. He goes out there with his sword, he tells the Shomroni, the Samaritans, he says, you will not do this. You are not permitted to set up your tents here, and you are not permitted to sell, and if you do, I will put you to death. Why? Because we just got back from exile for this very thing, this very road that you're taking us down. Saying what? Was it the buy? Was it the Jews' buy on Shabbat that was forbidden in the Torah? No, he says you shall not do any work. Is buying work? It can be, but not necessarily. Some people don't look at that as being work. But what? It's leading them down this road. It's like saying that I want to go to Corpus Christi, so I get on the expressway and I head to Brownsville. If I want to go that way, why do I get on the expressway and go that way? This is the path that leads to the destruction. It all starts somewhere. And it usually starts as some little thing. All wickedness, all rebellion starts somewhere, and it usually starts as some little thing. So, Ezra is the one who put up the fences concerning the Sabbath and how we keep them. Now, the reason why I'm saying all of this is because there's among certain Orthodox Jews, when they get up in the morning, they say a bracha, a blessing called Modeh Ani, which means I thankfully surrender before you, living and eternal King. They wash their hands, and they say the bracha, the blessing for the washing of their hands. And then they go to get dressed. As they're getting dressed, many of these Orthodox Jews will put on one shoe first and then the other. Literally, they put on one sock and then they put on the other sock, and then they put on that shoe and they put on the other shoe, and then they tie that shoe and then they tie the other shoe. Saying what? They put on their right sock first and then they put on their left sock, and then they put on their left shoe and then they put on their right shoe, and then they tie their right shoe and they tie their left shoe. And every Orthodox man of this community, of these people, these Hasidim, dress this way every morning. They always dress in the same order. And so you will hear people say, and it's common again in the Hebrew roots movement, and it's common in the Karaite movement and all these kinds of things, and you'll hear them say, this is all just tradition of men. Nowhere in the scripture does it say that I should put on my right sock first, and then my left sock, and then my left shoe, and then my right shoe, and then tie my right shoe and tie my left shoe. This is all just tradition of man. It's just made up. It has nothing to do with scripture. It has nothing to do with any of these things. So this is just foolishness, and I'm not going to do it. Okay, well, don't do it. That's good. But what they're missing out on is why. They just look at it and they say, this is foolishness, this is dumb, I'm not going to do it. What they're missing out on is why this community does this. And actually, if we would learn from this community, we would go much further in being what we're supposed to be. Why? Well, there's a reason why, and we find the answer in the Talmud why these people get dressed this way. The reason why these people get dressed this way is because they had a rabbi whom they loved and they admired and they desired to emulate in every way that they possibly could. They so loved him, they so wanted to be with him, that they wanted to copy him in everything that he did. They wanted to do it that way. They wanted to talk like him, they wanted to dress like him, they wanted to act like him, they wanted to eat what he ate, be what he was, everything. They wanted to be exactly like their rabbi. They even wanted to dress the way he dressed. They wanted to dress the order. They wanted to get dressed in the morning in the same order. Why? Because this is the way our rabbi, we love him, we want to get dressed even in the same order that he gets dressed. So one day, a group of his Talmidim, a group of his students came to him and asked him, Rabbi, tell us how do you get dressed in the morning? How do you put on your shoes and your socks? And so the rabbi showed them. He explained to them, well, I sit on my bed, and first I put on my right sock. And then I put on my left sock. Then I put on my left shoe, and then I put on my right shoe. And then I tie my right shoe, and then I tie my left shoe. And this is the way I put on my shoes and socks. So these Talmidim, who were shadowing their rabbi, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of their rabbi, so loving him and emulating him, left that day to go about their business, determined that they were going to be so close to their rabbi, so like him, that they would even put on their shoes and socks in the same order that he did. So that today we have this whole community of Hasidim, of Hasidic Jews, who when they get up in the morning, the man puts on his right sock and then his left sock. Then he puts on his left shoe and then his right shoe. And then he ties his right shoe and he ties his left shoe. And there are thousands of these Hasidim who every day put on their shoes and socks in this very manner. Why? Because of one rabbi, they emulate him. In saying that, then let me say this. In saying that, this is exactly what it is, the relationship between a Talmid and a Ravi. This is the relationship between the disciple and the rabbi, the student and the master. This is what is being spoken of, and this is what we're taught in Scripture, that we are to emulate him. That we are to be like him. How much like him? So much like him that I even want to get dressed in the same order which he dressed. The way he spoke, I want to speak. The way he lived, I want to live. What he did, I want to do. How he, everything about him. So that when they see me, they don't really see me, they see him. You see, among the Orthodox community, you can tell just by watching the people, you can tell who their rabbi is. By listening to them talk, even by their accents, you can tell who their rabbi is. You listen to the words that they use. You watch what they do. You see how they dress, and you can tell exactly what community they're coming from. Why? Because they emulate their rabbi. Can we say the same thing about Christianity? And can we say the same thing about Messianics? That I know who, I can tell, that the people can tell, they look at you and they can tell who your rabbi is. Who is my rabbi? We say that our master, our rabbi, our teacher is Yeshua, is Jesus. Really? How do we know? Oh, well, because I'm telling you. No, that's not good enough. That doesn't work. Because words are words. The proof of my life is my actions. It's not what I'm telling you. It's what I myself am living. It's not that what comes out of my mouth. It's what comes out of my heart through my actions. As the Scripture tells us, by their fruits you shall know them. What? Exactly this. How do you know that this person is from Chabad? How do you know that he's Lubavitcher? How do you know that this one over here is Chassid? How do you know that this one over here is Nachman? How do you know that these different ones are from these different communities? How do you know? By their fruit. What is the fruit? By how they talk, by how they act, by how they live, by how they dress, by all of these things. You put it all together and you say, that's Lubavitcher. That's Nachman. That's Chassid. You know. You can tell. You look at most people who call themselves by Christian today. Can you tell that they're Christian? Can you tell who their rabbi is? You cannot tell who the rabbi is when the person looks like everybody else and is dressing like everybody else, acting, talking, all of these things just like everybody else. How do you know who the rabbi is? Reformed Judaism has the same problem. How do you know? How do you know a person is a Jew if they're a Reformed Jew? How do you know that they're a Jew? You can't tell. They don't look Jewish, they don't act Jewish, they don't talk Jewish, they don't speak Jewish. Except for on Shabbat, maybe if they go to synagogue. But other than that, they look like everybody else. I tell you one thing. Orthodox Jew. You know an Orthodox Jew when you see an Orthodox Jew because they look Orthodox. They stand out. They're different. The whole thing about Reformed Jews is they don't want to stand out. They want to look like everybody else. They want to be like everybody else. They want to look American or European or however. They want to be like everybody else. They want to sound like everybody else. They want to act like everybody else. They want to be what everybody else is. They don't want to stand out. They want to assimilate. They want to go underground, undercover. This is true. The same thing is true in Christianity. The same thing is true in some of Messianicism. How do you know how do you know that this person is a follower of Yeshua? How do you know that this person is a follower of Jesus? How do you know that this person is attached if they don't act attached? The way that you knew who the rabbi was of this person or this group was the way the group spoke, dressed, acted, all of these things. Why? Because they emulated their rabbi. The way we know that a person is a true follower of Yeshua is that they emulate Yeshua. A person is a true follower of Jesus because they emulate Jesus in their lives. Meaning what? How he lived, they lived. How he spoke, they spoke. The things that he did, all of these things. The way he treated people, the way he acted. This, by emulating Jesus, by emulating Yeshua, this is how you know. By their fruits you shall know them. Saying what? I am to be a shadow of Yeshua. That is how he moved, I move. When he moves, I move. Where he is still, I am still. I am to be his shadow. I am B'Tselem Elohim. I am created in his image, in his likeness. I am created as his shadow. So that I do not move without him. I do not move on my own. I do not go my own way. I do not do my own thing. I do not speak my own words. Everything must be according to him. The shadow is never separated from the subject. The Talmid is never separated from the rabbi. Nor are you and I ever to be separated from Yeshua. We're attached to him. And this is where you and I find our true pleasure. Everything else is a pleasure that does not bring satisfaction. The only true pleasurable experience for the human heart, why? Because we're created this way. The only true pleasure for the human heart is to be attached to God. Anything else is just an imitation. And the imitation is never like the real thing. The imitation never lasts. It is only a temporary thing that will give us pleasure for a moment, but then it is gone, and we have to go back to it again and again and again. There is only one true pleasurable source for mankind, and that is God himself. And we must reattach ourselves to him. How do we do this? Through the branch. Who is the branch? Yeshua Mashiach. He is the branch. And through him, we become attached to God. And so how is it? B'Tselem Elohim. As the shadow is attached to the subject, so I am attached to Yeshua. By being attached to Yeshua, I am attached to God. I am attached to the Eternal One. And it is there that I find my pleasure. So with that we say, Shabbat Shalom.